We're looking at a whole bunch of things that have happened in the news lately. Joe Biden and his impeachable offenses, including the war in Afghanistan, the approach that he's taking toward mandating vaccines. And then we're going to talk about abortion and how there's a connection here between how we debate vaccines and how we debate the morality and the legal status of abortion.
We also want to talk about objectivists and the topic of abortion specifically, because while we agree with objectivists on many things, including natural theology, though they wouldn't call it that, they would call it philosophy, we strongly and sharply disagree with them on the topic of abortion. And it's not a result of our religion. It's not because the Bible says that abortion is wrong. It's because it's plain from the reality of the nature of the things involved that abortion is wrong. And they, by their own standards, objectivists, by their own standards, are irrational and wrong and morally evil for their stance on abortion. So we want to talk about that, and then also about the contrast of that with the vaccine mandate and the talking about my body, my choice, what the differences and similarities, if there are any similarities, are. There's a lot going on between objectivists, between Christians, and just on the wider scale of the nation. And so we want to dive into all of that and flesh it all out.
Well, let's start out with some reasons why Joe Biden should be impeached. The one that I'm not going to say on YouTube is that it's unclear. I'll just leave the rest of that to your own mind. It's unclear. But let's go on to the next thing about Biden. Abandoning Americans and allies in enemy territory. Giving billions of dollars of U.S. weapons to an enemy. Negotiating with terrorists. Tyrannical abuse of authority with the vaccine mandates. And if you would like to, you can go to change.org and you can find the petition that I made. This is not going to be, it's not like anybody has to do what I say, but it's a petition if you'd like your name to be on this thing that says Biden should be impeached. It's called Congress Must Impeach Joe Biden. So you can search for it that way. Congress must impeach Joe Biden. And it's simple. I don't list my reasons because that's not the point. It's just what's the conclusion. Joe Biden is worthy of impeachment and removal. And get this is where the teeth are. All U.S. senators and representatives have a moral responsibility to call for this and to take steps to achieve it. We consider any politician who shirks this duty to be contemptible and unworthy of public office. The point of this is not that it's going to reach Joe Biden. The point of this is if this petition were to take off, it could reach Ted Cruz, Rand Paul. It could reach Thomas Massie. They need to hear from their constituents. We consider it just beneath contempt that nobody has yet attempted to impeach Biden. You must try. There's a symbolic necessity here. Even if there is no chance of succeeding, don't be a pragmatist. It's morally necessary to call for it and to take steps. We've seen these people on Twitter offering their sick burns, but they are elected officials. I can go on Twitter and say Joe Biden's ridiculous just as well as you can. What we need from our elected officials is for you to do something about it. And that means taking legal action, legislative action. That is what is necessary in this time.
That's right. And we should all be taking every opportunity we can to press those men, the conservative Republican leaders who are supposed to be defenders of liberty and freedom. We need to take every opportunity we can to press them to do what's needed rather than just saying cool, sick burn things on Twitter, right? So every time you see Ted Cruz or Thomas Massie or anyone else who is in a position of power, you need to comment, press them, share with links and moral reasoning that they need to be doing more than just tweeting about it. That they need to make the Democrats defend Biden. Make the Democrat, don't just put your hands up in the air and say, well, the Democrats are in power, there's no way it would pass. I don't care. Make them defend him. Put the show on display for the American people, the same way that the Democrats would if it was reversed. You think the Democrats would just throw their hands up and say, well, it's not going to work because the Republicans are in power? No way. They would fight the moral battle, which is what conservatives need to be doing. They would make Republicans defend the immoral actions of the president so that they could put it on wide display, so that they could use it in campaigning against them. That's what Republicans need to be doing. At the very least, make Democrats defend Biden's abandoning of American citizens and American allies in Afghanistan to the Taliban. Make Democrats defend Biden handing over billions of dollars of US equipment to the Taliban. Make them defend the mandates that are anti-scientific and tyrannical and that have zero constitutional authority behind them. Make them defend all of this explicitly.
And anyone that is in Congress that will not do those things, we must attempt to primary them. We must tell them that we condemn them, that we do not consider them worthy of the position to which they have been elected. Jacob had something to say the other day on Twitter. He said the reason the left has so much of the culture on their side, they are dead serious about public morality. Conservatives, on the other hand, stupidly think it's improper to speak passionately about public morality. This is why we need to bring back preaching publicly and passionately about public morality, not just the pious private morality that conservatives find so safe, but proclamations about what is good and evil in society, including economics, government, art, education. Contrary to the babbling of the pietists, these public areas of life are subject to the moral categories of good and evil. It is long past time that we start speaking and acting like it. There is rampant social evil in our culture. Pastors must begin preaching against it.
A lot of conservatives, Christians, non-Christians alike, will talk a really big game and get really morally serious and use morally charged language for stuff like pornography or sexual innuendos in TV shows and things like that. But when it comes to theft, when it comes to tyranny, when it comes to widespread abuse of power, they act like it's sort of a gray area. It's amoral. It's not our job to speak about that. Yes, it is. It's just as serious as the sexual immorality that you want to harp about. It's just you're a stupid pietist that needs to grow out of it. You need to understand that these moral categories apply to all of these public sins the same way they apply to your secret sins of sexuality or whatever else that you want to focus on. So we need to have the same passion and the same vitriol that we have about things like pornography with things like economic tyranny or abuses of power in the government sector.
No, it's been difficult for me. The last 10 years, I've been thinking, well, the income tax is immoral, but how am I supposed to take a stand against the income tax without every person that I've ever met, except for a couple of close friends, ridiculing me? I used to teach in a public school. I was a music teacher. I remember I printed out an article from Ayn Rand and put it on the desk in the lunchroom, and it was an article about how public schools shouldn't exist. And I said, what do y'all think of this? It was funny. I got some concerned emails from my Christian coworkers at a public school saying, I don't know about this Ayn Rand. It's just the frame of mind that people are in is so different from the frame of mind that I have. I think that most of what the government is doing is immoral today, almost without fail. 99 out of 100 times, if the government's doing it, I don't think it should be. But now we've, this week, come up with something where we actually can take a stand, and we know that there will be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who will actually listen. So this is your opportunity if you want to take a stand. I posted earlier on Twitter, gentlemen, this is the hill. And that is what Joe Biden has done this week with the proposed vaccine mandates, penalizing companies that have 100 or more employees who do not require the vaccine. This is the most blatant of all the reasons so far. Even, I would say, even more strong of a reason than Afghanistan and the handling of that. This is why Joe Biden must be impeached. This is why the Supreme Court must give a ruling that radically reduces the overreach of executive power. So let me explain to you some thoughts on this hill. We have a previous video that came out just recently about vaccine mandates and why we have a moral right to say no. We released that video before there was this legal thing. But now, in light of the legal thing, let's talk about it. Someone asked me, okay, so you say that you should resist tyranny on this hill of the requirement to get a vaccine. He said, okay, so what are your thoughts on should we comply if we're going to lose our mortgage? Should we comply if we're going to lose the ability to pay for the diapers for our kids? What is it going to cost us? So I directed him to our video about the moral reasons why you should not let people force you to receive a medical treatment. But as far as how to avoid complying, that's going to affect different people in different ways. At FTNCI, we advocate rational egoism. You should do what's best for your family. So I'm not going to say, hey, everybody, you must join me and not get the vaccine on principle just to stick it to the man. If that's going to end up with you getting put in prison, then weigh it carefully and decide whether that's something that you want to do. I have a lot of thoughts on this, but Jacob, what are your thoughts on how to make moral decisions in this time?
Well, first of all, you have to reject sloppy, pious thinking. You have to be 100% committed to rationality and objectivity, because this is serious. There's a lot of details. There's a lot at stake, and you have to think through it carefully. You can't do the knee-jerk reactions that you might be used to doing on cultural issues like this, right? So be committed to thinking carefully, objectively, and rationally, and taking everything into account. Now, having said that, when we say that we advocate rational egoism, that doesn't mean that for everyone, that means rational egoism is not taking a stand because it's better for your family, for you to keep your job. The reason it doesn't mean that is because it could be that rational egoism means if I don't take a stand now, then it's going to be much worse for my family 5 or 10 years from now because of the government overreach that will be enabled by my not taking a stand. That's a possibility too. And so you've got to weigh those are the things that you have to weigh. Those are the types of things you have to weigh. There's a lot there. And we can't give a prescription for any one person. We can only give guidance. But the guidance is think about it in those terms, in a rational and egoistic, meaning self-interested way for you and your family, weighing all of the factors.
An important factor to weigh is where are you in life and where are you going? So for someone like myself, like I have somewhat of a public audience and I have somewhat of a decent network of people that also have a public audience. And so I'm considering, if it ever came to the point where they would threaten me with, shutting down my bank accounts, I'm considering protesting and not ever receiving this medical treatment. That's a possibility. I can do that for a couple of reasons. I'm financially in a position to be able to, socially in a position because my family supports me. On both my parents and my wife's parents support us as far as if I took a moral stand, they would be behind us. Financially, they would be willing to help us. And if I were ever to be in this legal or public relations battle against the US government, I would know how to find legal counsel. I would be able to afford legal counsel. I'd be willing to fight a public relations battle way in public. I'd be willing to do that. Even I've counted the cost for my family. Not everybody has done that. Not everybody has the skills or the willingness to speak in public. So you have to think about whether you would want to do that. Think about your situation with your employment. What are the consequences going to be? Because perhaps you leave one job to go to another, but then the regulation changes and then the next job kicks you out as well. So the future is looking pretty grim, but we can know that it's going to be executed in a dishonest way. Step by step, more and more companies are going to start falling to peer pressure rather than to the actual requirements of the law. It's going to become more difficult before it becomes easier. Now, there's a possibility that you could outlast this, that it could blow over. One of the best pieces of advice that I've received is don't quit, get fired. That way you're going to collect unemployment, and that way you have the potential to sue. You ought to be prepared to sue. That's an important consideration.
And now, more importantly, that way you aren't agreeing with it. You aren't giving them your sanction. You aren't helping them to pretend that you somehow did this voluntarily, that you somehow had a voluntary say in this. No, make them take all of the action against you so that they know, so that it is clear that they are the aggressors here.
Now, despite what Michael Spangler may have been saying lately on Facebook, Doug Wilson is right. You do not have the obligation to tell anybody the truth about your health status when it comes to this kind of vaccine or whatever treatment it is. I just want to say about the question of refusing it, if you believe it's worthwhile to take a stand and to refuse, then do so. And if you believe that it is not really that important either way, do what you think is best for your family and for your future in the world that you want to live in. Keep in mind that your actions are probably not going to affect a lot of people very much either way, unless you're the owner of a company or something like that. Then it becomes much more important what you're going to do because you're affecting other people's ability to earn their income. I'll give you some reasons for my own refusing to take this treatment. Who knows what'll happen to our YouTube video if I say this, but look, all of the data and all of the sources that are reporting on this are ludicrously untrustworthy. That's the first thing to know. Do you really want to be taking advice from people that are pointing a gun at you, that are threatening to close your bank account and make you lose your job?
Moreover, people who have recently lied, blatantly so, about this very topic. Right? Like Fauci has blatantly lied about a number of things, especially the masks, right, which is related to COVID. So we can't trust anything Fauci has to say on this. The CDC said that racism is a greater health crisis than COVID, which is an obvious joke. So you can't trust anything that they have to say. I forget what the WHO did, but they had a number of absurd things, a year ago, more recently than that. So almost all of the medical experts on the national level are completely untrustworthy. So you can't say, well, the experts say, well, no, the experts aren't experts. They aren't trustworthy. I'm not going to trust a medical professional who isn't willing to say, those guys, the WHO, Fauci, the CDC, those guys are political hacks. If a medical expert is willing to publicly say that, then I might trust them. So I'm still going to be skeptical.
Right. Otherwise, they're less than trustworthy. In other words, if they say it, I'm going to assume that the exact opposite of what they're recommending is probably what's in my best interest. Yep. And there are reasons why it could be. One reason is that it's important in their worldview to buckle down on everybody and say, if the government mandates it, then you must do it. Perhaps that's their motivation. Is that a good motivation for me to inject something that has not been tested into my body? No. Another reason is perhaps 10 years from now, they do not want there to be a control group in order to be able to say, oh, well, you've been affected, you haven't. We can look at the longitudinal studies. We don't know what the effects are of this treatment. So that's one reason. It's just, I don't know how it's going to affect my health. I don't trust the sources of information about that question. I don't think that they're honest people. But there's another reason why you might want to consider rejecting this mandate and not complying with it. And that is, as I was hinting at before, compared to other controversial issues in public life, this is one where you have the chance, if you take a stand, that you're not going to be the only one and you're just going to get sniped immediately and the story's over. There are millions of people that agree with you on this one. And so, I'm not going to resist the government by not paying my taxes, but I will resist the government by doing this, because this is a moment where it may be a worthwhile time to say this is an unrighteous law. And if it comes to the point where they're putting people in concentration camps like they are in Australia, or imprisoning people, then I will reconsider, because perhaps it's not worth it to me personally. But for now, while I don't think that prison is a threat, while I don't think that closing of bank accounts is a threat, I'm planning to continue resisting, ignoring everything that they say, as long as it is convenient to do so, and advocating to others that they do the same. Let me give you another consideration. As Jacob mentioned, we're at a turning point. If there's not a large number of people that are going to take a stand on this, the future is going to look very different for you and for your family. And so you should care about the state of your society. And you might not succeed. If you take a bold stand, you might fail. But you should also think about your rational self-interest. When you are a 60-year-old or a 70-year-old or an 80-year-old, what do you want to say to the next generation about whether or not you tried to fight for their freedoms? What kind of life do you want to have at that age? Perhaps we will live in something that is more socialist, more collectivist, less freedom, more tyranny. But you want to be able to say to that next generation, this is what is true. And I believed it. And I fought for it. And that's how you know that I believed it. So those are some considerations as you decide whether or not to take a stand. But do consider some other things as well. Like, do you know anything about your own health situation that would affect that decision? What is your backup plan? Do you have a backup plan? Do not go to war without first counting the cost.
It's important to consider the actual health information that we do know, right? So we know that if you're young and healthy, COVID is relatively low risk for you, given the statistics, right? Now that could change, the numbers could change, the data could change because we get more information. But given what we know right now, according to the experts even, right, COVID for young, healthy people is relatively low risk. Well, if you take that and compare it to a brand new vaccine, that has only been around for about a year, and you're young and healthy, the potential risk with the vaccine is way higher than your potential risk for getting COVID, because you don't know what the vaccine is going to do 10 years down the road.
Yeah, well, we especially have to consider that this is a different kind of treatment. This is not a variant on a known approach to treatment. This is a new kind of treatment that could affect your body in ways that we don't understand.
Yeah, and I mean, that same calculus may not apply if you're in a high risk category, right? If you're old, if you've got comorbidities, then it may very well be worth it to you to take the vaccine, because whatever long-term side effects it might have are less important than the fact that if you do get COVID, you're probably going to die, right? So it depends on your health, your age, and things like that. Now, the other thing that's not being taken into account is natural immunity. The whole point of a vaccine is to mimic natural immunity, right? Natural immunity is you get the disease, your body learns to fight it off, and then from then on, you're immune to it because your body is ready. It's got the antibodies, it's got the memory of the disease. So if the disease comes into your body again, your body's able to fight it off much quicker before it's able to cause any serious harm. And then a vaccine, the whole theory behind a vaccine is to mimic that, to trick your body into thinking that you have the actual disease so that your immune system kicks in and builds up the antibodies so that your body remembers having it, so that when you do get it, your body's able to fight it. That's how a vaccine works. So a vaccine is meant to mimic natural immunity, but everybody is pretending as though natural immunity doesn't even exist. As if even if you had COVID before, which means you've now got natural immunity against it, you still have to be vaccinated, which is just absurd. Like it's so anti-science and anti-reason that, again, it leads one to think, I can't trust these people.
Now, these are the people that we are being called upon to submit to by those who abuse Romans 13. And we saw this last couple of weeks from Michael Spangler on Facebook. He said, in response to Doug Wilson's article advocating that you might want to be ready in some situations to not divulge the truth about your status, about whether you're vaccinated or not. This is what Michael Spangler wrote. A large sector of conservative reformed social media just spent the part of the past 2 weeks fantasizing about how they will be faithful to God under the coming persecution, ... by telling bold-faced lies. The American church is under judgment. This amount of question begging and high-handed snark is palpable enough that I'm not going to read anything from him in the future. But I commented to Jacob when I saw that, and this would be a good topic. We want to include this because there's plenty of Bible passages that would advocate for when somebody is trying to be an aggressor against you, that you don't owe them a true answer to a question they have no right asking. There's an important historical and philosophical debate. Like, for example, you could think of Corrie ten Boom, who trusted God, and she said that she was hiding Jewish people under her table, but actually they were in a trapdoor underneath the table. And somehow, when she said that, the Nazis looked under the table and they never saw the trapdoor and they left. And that was her conviction that she shouldn't lie. But I disagree with her conviction on that. I don't think that it was informed by an understanding of, the story of Rahab or the story of the Hebrew midwives, or even accounts from Jesus's life where he was intentionally misleading other people, or David or Abraham. There are many cases of people misleading others in the Bible. And Jacob's response to that was, stupidity kills. Stupid theology kills even more. And he wrote, it is a sin to tell the truth to wicked men who want to use that truth to serve their wickedness and lies. So you need to realize it may not actually be a morally gray area, and it may actually be a sin to tell the truth if people are going to use that to harm you or other innocent people.
The point of being honest is to promote what is true. If you're quote unquote honest to those who want to use your honesty to further false things, evil things, then you are submitting to their evil. You are being complicit in their evil.
This is an illustration of the importance of what we discussed recently on natural theology, the importance of philosophy for Christian moral calculus, because you have to analyze what is the reason why being honest is important. Like, why would honesty be an important thing? And according to the philosophy that I use for analyzing these questions, when you say what's right and wrong, what you're asking is how is this going to further the needs of human life by the standard of man's life, man the rational being? Well, how can you further your own life and the needs of that life by faking reality? You can't. But when somebody is trying to fake reality at you by pointing a gun at you and saying you are obligated to do this, they're ignoring the reality that you have rights. You don't have to participate in their faking of reality by telling them the facts that they are not owed. The principle here that we get from Ayn Rand is that you should not seek to gain values by faking reality. I mean, I think it's a very helpful way of thinking about it. It'll tell you whether or not you are in the moral right or moral wrong. Are you seeking to gain values? There's no obligation to help people hurt you.
I think you could even just say, don't fake reality. And you might say, well, if I lie to the Nazi, then I'm faking reality to the Nazi. Well, look at it in the bigger context. He is faking reality. You are either going to help him fake reality or not. By telling him what he wants, the quote unquote truth in the small context, the small circle, you are helping him fake reality and serving the lies in a much wider context. Versus if you quote unquote lie in the smaller context, you are doing so on behalf of the wider truth. If you quote unquote tell the truth to the Nazi that you're hiding Jews, you are helping the Nazi fake reality. You are serving his faking of reality. You're serving him in his lies, and you're serving the father of lies by helping them to accomplish their goals through their lies.
In the case of Corrie ten Boom, it was just by God's mercy that her failure there to understand the moral issues didn't result in those people being discovered.
Yes, God saved her and those people from her stupidity.
So let's talk about stupidity. Brett McCracken at the Gospel Coalition posted this: among the surprising developments of 2021, quote, "My body, my choice" has become a rallying cry of both the left and the right for different reasons. Though the gulf seems wide in divided America, one idol, unhindered autonomy, tempts all tribes. You posted this yesterday and you said this is the senior editor of the Gospel Coalition. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, it really shouldn't be surprising that someone in that sort of position at the Gospel Coalition is saying something like that, but it still was. I was still floored. And I think probably a lot of people were. Shouldn't be, but hey, I guess I'm more charitable than I thought I was.
So how many problems can we find in his statement? Let's look at it. So first of all, this idea of my body, my choice, this is an interesting comparison because you've seen, just like you talked about with the Black Lives Matter, that is taken to mean something different than it really means. Well, my body, my choice really ought to mean that you shouldn't be putting people in prison if they haven't committed a crime, that you shouldn't be injecting them with something if they didn't say you could. My body, my choice would be a perfectly good motto, except for it's been used by people that are pro-abortion. And the illogic there is obvious. It's not your body. If it were your body, then an abortion would result in you dying. But an abortion results in somebody else dying because it affects somebody else's body. That's super easy. So this whole, like, my body, my choice, this would be, I mean, honestly, the pro-life movement, they should have called themselves the pro-choice movement. They should have said, we believe that each individual has a choice over their own body, and therefore that you're not allowed to abort this unborn child because you're not giving them the choice. The pro-life movement stands for choice. Conservatism stands for choice. It stands for keeping the government out of things that it doesn't belong in, this authoritarian, tyrannical movement. Conservatives are the ones that are pro-choice in that sense. When it comes to this issue of vaccines, we should be using this choice-based rhetoric. We should be saying, my body, my choice, because it is my body. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, the problem is, well, there's a couple problems here. One problem is that conservatives by and large have allowed leftists to take over the language and to reframe things, or to frame things, and then they're reacting within that framework rather than stepping back, thinking about the big picture and reframing things themselves, right? Which is what you are doing there when you say that we should say that the pro-life position is also the pro-choice position. So instead of letting the leftists frame the argument and then reacting, that's what we need to be doing. We need to be taking over the language and reframing it. But in addition to that, you're right. It's not the woman's body that she's aborting. It's a different body. That's why something else is dying rather than her. And for McCracken to equate my body, my choice in regard to vaccines with my body, my choice with abortion would indicate that he doesn't believe that he thinks that being anti-abortion really is a violation of the woman's body, in the same way that being anti-vax is a violation of your body.
Okay, I think I'm tracking with you. So he thinks that there's this group of people out there that are rabid individualists, and that the logical implication of their individualist position is that you should be able to kill babies and that you should be able to refuse vaccines.
Yes,
and he thinks they're both wrong because, and the reason why he thinks they're both wrong is because he thinks that individualism is wrong. Exactly. And that's why in his tweet he says there's one idol, unhindered autonomy that tempts all tribes. So notice how his worldview frames these problems. One of them is a problem, one of them's not, in truth, but he considers both of them problems, and he framed it so radically upside down.
Yep, and Timon Klein did something similar where he said that the problem with conservatives is their, not the exact words he used, but something like the worship of personal autonomy or the worship of choice. So he's basically saying the same thing, and he's a conservative, right? He would probably be opposed to McCracken on certain things because McCracken is far less conservative than Timon Klein would be on most topics, I would assume. But even Timon Klein is saying that yes, conservatives talking about my body, my choice are worshiping personal autonomy. What are you talking about, dude? Like these people think that the problem is individualism or the problem is personal autonomy, and that leftists really are about personal autonomy and about individualism. No. In what world, in what fantasy nightmare world do you think that leftism is about individualism? That they are collectivists to the extreme. The only way that you can say that leftists are about individualism is if you mean by individualism whim worship, like following your emotions regardless of the facts of reality. But that's not what individualism is. In the same way, leftists aren't about personal autonomy. That they only use that language as a convenient cover so long as it's convenient, so that they can go on and destroy everything that's good and natural in the world. That their goal is destruction. That they will use anything as an excuse for that destruction. That they are for personal autonomy when it's a convenient excuse to destroy the baby in the womb, but they're against personal autonomy when it's destroying your right over your body to refuse a vaccine, or when it's destroying your means of living by putting you out of work or by stealing all of your income. They are nihilists through and through. Don't grant them the compliment of saying that they are for personal autonomy or that they are for individualism. They aren't. And it's insane to think so.
So there are many ways to be wrong about this topic of my body, my choice. And one of the ways that it's easy to be wrong is the radical leftist position, where they're wrong about everything. There's no possible way that they're right about anything. But then there's, say, Timon Klein, like you mentioned, or others that are going to take this position that says, well, we need to analyze it in terms of individualism, and we need to say that individualism is the problem. Now, there's a mirror image of that And that's people on the objectivist side that have said that individualism is the principle, it's a good principle, but then they've made a mistake in applying it. And I think that it's a methodological problem in all of these cases, whether it's the radical leftists, the family-friendly socialists, the objectivists. There's a problem here, and that is that they are not willing to face the facts. For each one of these positions, we've described which facts are they overlooking. So let's talk about the objectivists and which facts they are overlooking. I think it started out the other day with Yaron Brooks' tweet, where he basically got ratioed on the topic of abortion. As you know, For the New Christian Intellectual, we very strongly repudiate Ayn Rand's and Leonard Peikoff's and Yaron Brooks' position on abortion. They believe that it should be legally allowed. And the reason is they believe that until the unborn child is separate from its mother biologically, that it's incoherent to speak of individual rights. At least that's the kind of thing that they argue. But when you ask them, okay, so what is the thing? What is the thing that you are going to be killing? That's where they are unwilling to face the facts. Can you share with us a little bit about your discussion, Jacob?
Yeah, I can't remember the specific details. I know I was going back and forth with Yaron Brook and Don Watkins and then some of their followers, but the general way that it goes is that they will either claim it's not a living thing, which is odd because then you're not really killing something. So they back out of that pretty quickly, and they end up going to, well, the living thing isn't actually human yet. It's only potentially human. And that's where you really start to scratch your head, because the question is, well, then what is it actually? And that's where, like you said, they want to evade the facts. They won't say what it is actually. They will only say that it's potentially human. Well, is it actually a frog and it's going to transform into a human? Well, no, that's absurd. And so what it is they don't want to admit that it actually is a human. It's not just potentially human. It actually is a human. Well, I think what they want to say, but it's hard for them to say because they know that they might get pushback, is that it actually is a human. It's an actual living human, but it only potentially has rights. And that really is their position. Their position, if you really, really press them on it, is that the baby in the womb is an actual living human being, distinct from the mother, because they would have to admit that it's not. They would say it's not biologically separate from the mother, but it is a distinct entity. It's a distinct human being. It's not the same thing as the mother, right? It's a distinct living entity, and the entity is a human being. So it's a distinct living human being that doesn't have rights. That's their position.
Yeah, and they might use the word personhood. They might say rights and personhood imply each other, and they'd say it does not become a person until it's biologically distinct. The umbilical is severed.
That's right. And now, the reason that they're going to evade on the way to getting there is because they know that it's going to be really, really difficult to make a case that a living human being is not a person, and that a living human being does not have rights. And moreover, if they're going to say that, then it's going to be even harder to define objectively and rationally when the living human being gains personhood and rights in a non-arbitrary way. And so I would just say, for anyone who interacts with objectivists, I think Zuby, the rapper, I think he's supposed to be debating Yaron Brook or Don Watt, somebody, a major objectivist, on the topic of abortion soon. So if he happens to come by this, or if someone knows him, wants to share this with him, anyone who's debating with an objectivist or discussing the topic of abortion with an objectivist, you have to press them on this point. You have to get them to confess, to admit it is a distinct living human being, and get them to say that this distinct human being does not have rights, does not have personhood, and then to defend that claim, because that is the essence of their position.
And they won't say it that way because they know it's devastating to their position.
That's right.
But if they won't say it, if they won't acknowledge and own up to the fact that that is their position, then that is where you take the battle and you say, you will not own up to this being your position. And the fact that you will not is a proof that you're being dishonest.
Exactly. One of the ways that they're going to evade that is they're going to, ironically, they're going to paint a word picture of what the fetus is like at some early stage of development, and then say, incredulously, you believe that that's a person? You believe that that has rights? And the reason I say that this is ironic is because it is objectivists who coined the term. I think it was Peikoff, actually, who coined the phrase, a picture is not an argument. And that was in response to anti-abortion activists showing pictures of babies in development, especially showing pictures of aborted babies, and how gruesome it is. And it really is gruesome. It's shocking. It's disgusting. It's barbaric. And you can know all that just by looking at it, right? And so in response to that, they want to say a picture is not an argument. But then they will turn around and paint a word picture of some early stage of development. It's just a clump of cells, right? Or it doesn't even look like a human yet, and say, how can that have rights? How can that be a person? Well, wait a second, Yaron Brook. I thought that a picture wasn't an argument.
This is where they are at their absolute weakest, because this claim, a picture is not an argument. Well, no, it's not an argument, but it's evidence. And objectivism attempts to position itself as being the pro-evidence belief system. But you're not going to be willing to look at the evidence. Instead of looking at the evidence, this is a dismembered baby that's been burned by acid and chopped up by a knife. And it's maybe this big, but it's definitely a human-like thing. Instead of being even willing to admit that into their court of evidence, they're willing to say something like, oh, but let's think about the consequences to the poor 20-year-old woman who didn't anticipate that it was going to enslave her for the rest of her life. And they begin to pile concept on concept.
Yep.
Since when are objectivists consequentialists? That's the exact opposite of your philosophy. You know what? I mean, Ayn Rand, you get to define what objectivism is and isn't. But if you really wanted to call your philosophy objectivism, you needed to do a better job.
Especially on this topic of abortion, and almost everything that they have to say on it is going to be begging the question. That they are going to beg the question and assume that the thing being aborted doesn't have rights and is not a human being, and then they're going to go on and wax about the rights of the woman and the suffering of the woman and things like that. The whole question of whether or not the woman has a right is logically after the question of whether or not the thing being aborted has a right to life.
And the question that you have to look at even logically before that is, what is the thing?
Exactly. The nature of the thing in question is the fundamental. And that is what they want to skip right past that and go to a woman's right.
It is for that choice to skip past that sadly I'm going to agree with God when these objectivists go to hell. I mean, I love them and I pray for them every week by name. I mean, a dozen or more of them, because they've helped me so much in my life. Their lectures, their books. But in the end, it's going to be a God's justice that condemns them to hell for their evasion on this and many other points, including his existence, but especially abortion of unborn children and God's existence. These are inexcusable sins, and it's a moral corruption. It's not merely a confusion or stupidity. It's a corruption that makes them stupid and confused. So on abortion, what is the thing before it is born? What is it about its nature that is purported to change the moment that it leaves the birth canal that accounts for it? What is the change that accounts for it going from not having rights to having rights? This is where they evade. I'll ask them that question very clearly. I'll say, okay, how is it that it changes its status? And they'll say, well, it's obviously different. Yes, it's obviously different, just like my 5-year-old is obviously different from my 7-year-old. But what is the difference that accounts for the difference? That's what I'm asking. And that's the question that you'll never get an honest answer to.
Yeah, what is the difference that accounts for it having rights one moment and not having rights the moment before? And they will try to worm out of that in every imaginable way. But that is the essential question. And that is a question that they aren't going to have a rational answer for. Or if they do, it's going to be a blatant rationalization that you'll be able to pin them on really quickly. And they know it, and that's the thing. If they didn't know that they didn't have a good answer for that question, then they wouldn't evade getting to that question in these discussions. They wouldn't hem and haw by pretending, oh well, no, it's not a human being, or jumping forward to talking about women's rights. They would focus confidently and explicitly on that question and give their answer, but they don't.
No, they'll say, "Oh, well, obviously you should build your moral system by don't look at the confusing philosophical positions. Look at the most obvious philosophical positions." But that's okay. But I still want to know, Don Watkins. I still want to know, like, why yes here and no here? Can you give an answer at all? Otherwise, this is just obfuscation. Or I asked them very clear questions and they change the subject. They answer different questions. I point out you did not address my questions. And it just goes on and on. And eventually you just point out to them, you're not answering my questions because you can't answer my questions. You're not even attempting to.
Yeah, and let me say something about the unclear cases versus the clear cases. I think that there's some equivocation or evasion going on there. So, or begging of the question, I think is more accurate. The whole point of asking that question that we're asking of what is the difference from one moment to the next that grants it rights is we're trying to get to the essential. We're trying to do definitions by essentials, right? Instead of looking at non-essentials, like what it looks like at a really early stage, right? Because they want to focus on some really early stage and say, well, it's really clear that it doesn't have rights there. And then they want to look at something way after birth and say, well, it's really clear that it does have rights there. And so they want to say, those are the clears, and we're going to define our philosophy by that. Okay, but those are only clear because you're doing argument by picture. Because you're looking at the thing and intuiting, well, yeah, obviously you can't smother the baby outside of the womb. And then they're looking at the clump of cells and saying, well, it seems absurd to say that that has rights. So it's a very sloppy clarity that they're going off of there. It's not doing it by essentials. It's not looking at the essential concepts and things involved. And that's what we are trying to get at when we say, all right, at this moment, it doesn't have rights. At this moment, it does. What makes the difference? We are driving at the philosophical essentials that are involved. They are the ones who want to evade the essentials and focus on what they're saying is clarity is really just what makes it easy based on a picture. It's really difficult to picture killing an infant outside of the womb. It's really easy to picture poisoning a clump of cells. And so we're going to say that those are the clear options, and we're going to say everything in between is the extreme or the difficult situation that we're going to ignore.
There's nothing unclear about the prospect of sticking a knife into an unborn child a week before he's born.
No, but that's why they want to avoid talking about that.
Right, because it's the proof that they're wrong.
They don't want to talk about a week before it's born. They want to talk about 7 or 8 months before it's born.
Yeah.
Because it's easier. They want to say it's clearer when really it's just easier to scoff and say, of course that doesn't have rights. They're doing implicitly argument by picture. It's just a word picture.
To give you an idea of how these conversations go and just how corrupt it is. So this is what Don Watkins said on Twitter on the 6th of September. He said, the fact that something is biologically tethered to its mother is part of the argument that it is not yet a person. Fetal development is a radically different process than the self-generated, self-sustaining action that is the essence of life. So he brings in all these concepts. So I asked him, do you believe that you have just indicated the substantiation for your position? And I added, do you mean to suggest that the embryo is not alive? Or if it is alive, do you mean to suggest that it is not undergoing a self-generated, self-sustaining action? But if not, then in what way does a newborn, or even like a newborn that's not crawling yet, how does it undergo self-generated, self-sustaining action? And instead of even addressing my questions, Don says, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm plainly saying that the development process is different than the life process. Is this a valid philosophical category here? I mean, life is a process of development, right? But he's saying that he means that the development before birth is a different process than the process of development after birth, which he calls life. And then, I mean, okay, sure, granted. And then he says, which is obvious to everyone not trying to sacrifice women to cells. So this is the extent of the quality of argumentation that you see from somebody who actually has a platform based on teaching people how to be persuasive online and in their writing. I mean, it's devastating. It's really sad for me because I like him. I've interacted with him positively on a lot of topics. And so I would just call you, as you're listening to this, and Don, if you ever see this, like, I want you to know that we're praying for you and we consider you an unreached person, and we are missionaries attempting to find even just a corner of the island on which you live. And please, listeners to this video, pray for Don, pray for Yaron, and for Peikoff. Leonard Peikoff is getting to the end of his life, and I pray that he'll be in heaven, but he's going to need to repent. Consider that FTNCI is a missionary organization in this one capacity, an organization intent on reaching an unreached people group with the gospel of Jesus Christ. We love these people. We love these people based on their value, which is immense. But they need Jesus Christ, because only Jesus Christ is going to open their eyes to their sinfulness. So please pray for them and join us. Do it for me and do it for God's glory.
Amen.
Well, let's wrap up our discussion today. Jacob, we've covered Biden's impeachment and the vaccines and abortion, the Gospel Coalition, and the people that are on all these sides of these issues. But the common feature of all of this is that we want to teach Christians moral reasoning. And I think that you can see that the Christians are hurting for moral reasoning. Seek it out. You know, it's in the book of Proverbs. It's all over the place. And seek it out in the videos that Jacob and I share of our process of trying to learn how to be better at moral reasoning. Do the work. Don't spend all of your free hours on entertainment and whatever is amusing, when you could be spending some of it on growing yourself in God's image for God's glory. Jacob, I'll leave you the closing word.
I really want to press the importance of what we mean by moral reasoning here. We don't mean coming to a number of good moral conclusions. That, in the long run, doesn't matter nearly as much as the way that you come to those moral conclusions, especially as much as building in yourself a process, a habit that is meant to track the truth of reality regarding moral issues, so that you can reliably come to correct moral conclusions about infinitely many things in the future. Because just having a grab bag of static moral conclusions, no matter how right they are right now, is not going to help you or your followers or those under your care. Think about your family, your children, your disciples at church. When things change, when things get more complex, when really, really difficult decisions come up, you're going to reach into that bag of static moral conclusions, and you're not going to find what you're looking for, or you're going to find what you think you're looking for, and it's not going to work because you're going to try to shoehorn something, like we talked about previously. So cultivate in yourself, in your mind, in your heart, a habit of reasoning rightly about moral things, so that you can come to the right moral conclusion no matter what comes your way, no matter what circumstances you find yourself in, so that you have the moral confidence to rely on your own understanding about things. And there, I don't mean your own understanding as opposed to God's understanding. I mean your own understanding as opposed to the conclusions of other people. When all of the world is telling you, you must believe X, You have to have the confidence that says, no, X is wrong, and here's why. So that you aren't taken captive by every false tide and every false wind of doctrine. You need to be able to stand on your own 2 feet rationally and morally. And you can't do that if all you've got is a grab bag of trite moral conclusions. You need to have a process. Fight to learn that process and to make it a habit. That's what we're trying to cultivate here at FTNCI.
Thank you for watching today. You can find us at christianintellectual.com. You can support us at patreon.com/FTNCI. Make sure you're getting our emails and say hello. We'd like to know that you're listening. We'd like to know if there's anything that you want to ask us about or that we should be sure to cover. We intend to get this message to more and more people and to equip others to do the same. If you think there's value in that, then please imitate what we are doing and join us in whatever way you're able to, whether it's donations or prayers. We love you. If you're one of those people that's listening that we interact with regularly, we pray for you all the time. And please do the same for us. God bless.
Amen.